so pleased that many of my friends and neighbors have accepted my invitation to join me this evening. Our family's going to be singing that tune quite a bit. Mr. Garfield put the lovely little melody to Lord Tennyson's words from In Memoriam, and he always loves to sing it this time of the year. I have told him that it is a wonderful piece of music, even though he's really not that wonderful of a singer. We have had a very busy summer and fall since my husband's nomination in Chicago in June. It has been a whirlwind here at our Menor farm, or Lawnfield, as you neighbors and the newspapers have been calling this place. Now we're focusing on Christmas and the Christmas season, and my husband is laid up this evening with a catarrhal cold and a headache, which he has graciously shared with me. When did Christmas get so hectic? I remember as a young girl that Christmas was not very elaborate at all. I grew up on a farm in Garrettsville, not far from here, the oldest of 4 children, and it many times was a work day for my family. And sometimes we even went to school on December 25th because as farmers' children, school was in the winter when there was nothing to plant or harvest. And Mr. Garfield, I'm sure, experienced the same things in Orange Township in his log home there. He was the youngest of the children in his household. And when he grew older, he even preached on Christmas Day. And he was also in school often on that day. So when did it all change? Well, when we were in our teenage years, a picture appeared in the local paper of Prince Albert sharing a fir, a tree, a pine tree, with Queen Victoria. It went all around the country here, and the Americans adopted that wonderful tradition of bringing that forest tree inside and decorating it with handmade ornaments. It became quite popular. And we started to have a wonderful Christmas dinner, raising turkeys on the farm. And I would help my mother, and my sister Nellie and I would both be in the kitchen helping with the dinner that evening. Mr. Garfield and I married in 1858. And those first years were lean ones. We didn't have very much. We didn't even have enough money to buy our own home. So we took rooms at Mrs. Northrup's boarding house in Hiram. And soon the war came. And my husband, like many others in our community, wanted to serve their country and do what they could for the Union cause. And he offered his services up to Governor Dennison. And when he left for Camp Chase in Columbus, Ohio, I moved back in with my parents. It was a bit of a setback. You know how independent you feel when you finally are out of that nest. But that was the circumstances at the time. And so Christmas in 1862, during the war, I was actually helping my mother prepare turkey again with my sister Nellie. I remember the lovely gifts that I got that year, though. Actually matching lush coats that General Garfield at the time sent home for our daughter, little Trot, and me. Very much like this cloak that you see here today, we received a matching pair of those. Little Trot was our first daughter, our first child, born in 1860. So a little toddler by that time. And she would speak of her papa often while he was away at war. And one of our saddest Christmases ever was the next year, in 1863, when we lost our little Trot to diphtheria. just 3.5 years old. She died the beginning of December. And so Christmas that year was a very somber occasion. We all expect to lose adults, family members who are older, our parents even, but to lose a child who's just begun life was like the atoms of your heart tearing. And so that Christmas will always be one that we remember. My husband was able to come home from the war and be with the family for little Trot's funeral. Our precious little girl, buried in Hiram in the cold December 1863. Back at that time, we usually made handmade gifts for Christmas. I remember receiving a knitted hood or a wonderful journal that I could keep my thoughts in every day. I also received a wonderful work box lined with wonderful fabric. One of those mementos that I have kept all these years. After my husband finished his career in the Army, he next turned to politics. And that took us to Washington, D.C. for most Christmases. For Congress was in session usually December through March. And so our family would leave Ohio like vagabonds and all move to Washington, and many of our Christmases were spent there. All of them were special. I remember one in 1872. Our daughter Molly was about 5, and her brother Jimmy was 2 years older. And our home in Washington was a brick house with a wrought iron railing down the front steps, right across from Franklin Square, Lafayette Park. The children loved to go play in the snow there. Well, one day, Molly was determined to dare her brother to lick the ice off the railing. And you all chuckle because you know what happened. He stuck fast. And it took copious amounts of warm water and some cloths to detach him from the railing. He was not happy most of that day. And Molly felt very sad for what she had done to her brother. And he took advantage of this. He had her running from the first floor up to the second floor to retrieve his favorite book. Perhaps give him a sip of water to drink to make his tongue feel better. And finally, my husband and I put a stop to that because he was running poor Molly up and down and left and right, and I think she had truly learned her lesson. She felt very poorly about what she had done to her brother. Just 2 years later, the day after Christmas, December 26th, we had our 5th son, our little Edward. He was born late that night after 9 p.m. It was the first time I took chloroform. And the children were all asleep. So the next morning, there were squeals of delight and all kinds of reactions to the fact that we had a new member of the family. Poor Molly. She was so sad because she had another brother. Molly is the middle of the family. We call her our happy child most of the time. She does very well with brothers on either side of her, several older, several younger than she is. But Grandma Garfield, my husband's mother, thinks that Molly's quite saucy. She does have a bit of a tongue sometimes. So, when Molly was 10, Christmas that year was special, 1877. My husband and I presented Molly with her first piece of real jewelry, a lovely blue enameled locket with pearls inlaid. My husband wrote this wonderful note to Molly that accompanied that gift. The locket which Christmas brings you is your first introduction to that series of delights in the way of jewelry, which rightly belongs to women. It carries with it a reminder of your duty to learn to be gentle. We ask you to begin with gaining that sweet quality which Shakespeare attributes to noble women, a voice gentle and low. And we hope your gifts of sweetness will more than keep up with the gifts which many happy Christmases may bring. Study this letter, darling, and with it accept the deep love of Papa and Mama. Not long after that, we had Christmas in Washington in 1879. Quite a festive occasion. Our house at 13th and I Streets had been enlarged. We had relatives from Ohio join us. It was a wonderful Christmas. By that time, we had purchased the Mentor farm here. And we were raising turkeys here on the farm and sending them to Washington for that special Christmas dinner. And I remember my husband and I thinking, now the children were getting a bit older, and we can enjoy the delight of Christmas just watching their excitement. We often had handmade gifts again, and books were always a part of Christmas in our house. Well, that brings us to 1880, to today. We are about to celebrate our first Christmas here at our Mentor farm. It's just something that is very exciting to us because our two older boys will be returning to us from boarding school in Concord, New Hampshire. And Hal, the oldest, has written a letter saying that he now has pubescent side whiskers. He's 17 now. And his brother Jimmy, tongue recovered from that terrible icy railing, has grown an inch according to his letters home. So the entire family is getting ready to get dressed early in the morning when their train arrives and to meet them at the station. I even think that Grandma Garfield will be up at the crack of dawn that day, dressed in her finest, ready to greet her grandsons. This is a very busy time, in spite of it being the holiday season, in a bit of politics in the way, because my husband, just a few weeks ago, was officially declared the 20th president-elect by the Electoral College. And so now he must turn his attention to creating a cabinet, to writing his inaugural address. And he has requested books and studying all of the addresses that have come before him, all the presidential inaugural addresses. And in spite of trying to have a few moments of family time, he has been besieged with letters of congratulation, telegrams, people requesting positions in the government. There are folks that are asking him to sit for portraits. And a few authors have contacted him to write biographies about him. And so he is busy trying to have some private time here with his family, as well as prepare himself for our next adventure. When those boys come home, though, it's going to be a fine day because they're now old enough that we could take them into our confidence, and they can help us select gifts for the younger children. You know, at 15 and 17, they'll be very handy in purchasing gifts with us in Cleveland. We'll take the train and spend the afternoon, and I think they'll be very happy to help us with that. You must also run home and decide what you're going to use for the secrets and surprises of the stockings. I think that maybe black and navy for the two older boys, and maybe the cream for Molly. But for the younger boys, Irvin and Abram, I thought these might be appropriate. A little elfish, don't you think? And of course, we will have our parlor tree just like Prince Albert gifted to his wife, Queen Victoria. And we'll have the children join in creating some ornaments for the tree, some paper ornaments, maybe some natural ornaments. Put a few greens about the house. And prepare a turkey for the big supper that we expect to have, because I do think that we will have several visitors. You know, the Steeles just up the road have dropped by a couple of times, and some family members of my husband's have been here to see us. And so I'm sure that we will have extras for our Christmas Day dinner. Christmas Day, it's a day filled with many traditions. My husband loves to play bagatelle. Are you familiar with that little bit of a cue and ball and stick game? It's something that he enjoys most heartily and has taught the older boys. And then we, of course, will be reading some of Dickens, maybe the Christmas Carol. Also some Shakespeare, perhaps. There's always an assortment of things that we love at the Christmas time. And then the boys will join in some card games like whist and euchre. Some of those games that get passed on to the next generation. Our Christmas seems to be a time of reflection also, because my husband usually, for New Year's Eve, will write in his diary a critique of his past year. And he will speak of the many positive things that happened, but also the things that he can improve upon. And I'm going to be busy preparing a trip to New York City, where I have to purchase some inaugural gowns and some other wardrobe pieces for life in the executive mansion. Mrs. Sheldon, my good friend, is going with me. We've already made those arrangements. I think that I'm going to have to take on an alias for a name, though, because if I don't, the press, the newspapers are going to be following me much too closely. Maybe Mrs. Greenfield, what do you think? Would that throw them off a bit? I think that would be the appropriate thing. Christmas, that time when all our family is together. Well, I think I hear the chiming of the hall clock. I fear I may have kept you too long already, but I'm hoping that you will join me in one more tradition, in singing a verse of a Christmas carol, How About God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, and we'll have some music to accompany us. Lucretia Garfield for 17 years. She looks like a teenager, but she's been doing it for 17 years. She plays Lucretia Garfield from the Civil War era
all the way up to Widow Garfield, a very old Mrs. Garfield as well. And there is no one who knows more about the First Lady than Debbie. She has been a researcher here with us, an educator. She's gives tours, and she's our lead volunteer currently. And I personally can't thank her enough for doing wonderful programs like this. She also goes out into the community, and what an education she gives everyone. But her love and passion for the site is bar none. And I hope you all stick around and you'll have a chance to chat with her. Right now, she's willing to take questions. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. As Debbie Weinkamer or as Lucretia Garfield. I guarantee if you're trying to stump her, you're not going to. And then afterwards, and what we'd like to do is, this is a large group, we'd like to stagger you into groups of 10 or 12 up to the house, so you can see the beautiful house at night. It is decorated in the tradition that Mrs. Garfield would have decorated. Of course, Victorian times, they weren't as elaborate as we are today. It's so tasteful. And we also have a game called I Spy. Just wasn't like before Christmas. We do it for kids, but it's a lot of fun. So you can also look for, and I can give little sheets we can hand out. You can look for some of the Christmas items in the house. But I've gone on too long already. So if anyone has a question for,
and before that, let me thank our fine flutists.
And I want to have another opportunity to thank you as well after we give a few questions, because I have a little something for them. They're from Lakeland Civic Band, and they have volunteered their time. Yes, so isn't that nice?
Yes, sir. Front row.
That first Christmas, was the house electric or gas or what was it?
First Christmas here at Lawnfield, the house was kerosene lighting and coal and wood stoves and fireplaces. So no electricity yet and no gas yet. That comes later. So you might think it was a bit primitive. When you see the house, the lighting in the first few rooms are going to look like they did with the kerosene lighting. It's going to be a dim type of light. But what a lovely atmosphere that sets. And then as you go to the second floor up by the Memorial Library, it will be brighter, because by the time the library was added, the gas had been found here on the property and piped up to the house. So that made for a nicer, warmer thing. Yes?
Yes, could you tell us about the painting there? It's on the wall.
Yes. Lucretia's younger sister Nellie, who was mentioned a couple times, she was about 12 years younger than Lucretia. She actually painted this landscape, and Ranger Mary found this lovely piece, and we thought it would be the perfect addition to the parlor here, to have an actual family heirloom right here in our midst. Her name was Ellen Rudolph, and they always called her Nellie. She had an education at Hiram College, just like Lucretia and James Garfield. And this is some of her expert work. She painted this about 1866, yeah?
66 or 7, yeah.
18. So think of how old this is. And this would have been painted right before Nellie got married and started a family of her own. So it's an extra special piece because she and Lucretia very close. Yes.
Where were you from in Deersville?
Wheeler Road. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Well, my grandfather, John Rudolph, had a number of acres there that he split up into farms for his boys, John, and my father, Zeb. And then he had his own parcel of land too. And there were many, many Rudolph relatives and relatives from my mother's side of the family. She was a Mason, all in that area. And so Wheeler Road is where I grew up. Mr. Garfield and I got married not too far from there in Hiram. But I'm a Garrettsville girl.
That's where Hiram College Bio Station is now on that land.
Yes, it's over in that area, isn't it?
Yeah.
And last year we had a field trip for our volunteers here where we lived a day in Lucretia's footsteps, and we went down to Garrettsville, and one of the gentlemen is still farming on that farm. It's called Birdsong Farm. And he was very gracious to take us on his property and show us the old house and and left us with a little miniature pumpkin from the farm. So we were trying to learn more about Lucretia's early beginnings in your part of the area. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Madam First Lady, you speaking about the festivities. How about is your family attending church services?
Oh, yes. Mr. Garfield and I are disciples of Christ. And so church is not far away, just on the avenue. Also, sometimes we go to other denominations because my husband likes to critique the other pastors' sermons and will write a bit about it in his diary. So sometimes you'll find us at an Episcopal or a Presbyterian church or some other church in the area. But normally we would be at the Disciples Church up the road there a bit.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
You met James Garfield at Hiram?
That was the second place we crossed paths.
When did you meet him in person?
We met in Chester Township, right at the crossroads of Chester at the Geauga Academy. Geauga Seminary, some folks call it. And it was a school of higher learning where it would prepare you to go on to teach or to go on to college. And we were merely classmates. This was 1848. And he was interested in Mary Hubble, and I was in love with the dapper Albert Hall. So Mr. Garfield and I were merely classmates at that time. I thought he was some sort of strange genius. Very tall, bright blue eyes, a shock of brown hair that looked like it did not have a haircut. But he was very smart, always the head of the class. And then we found each other again at Hiram. We crossed paths there in 1851. And again, a classmate at first, but that's where we started to notice each other a bit more. And our courtship began with a letter that he wrote to me after he saw Niagara Falls. And you know what that means, ladies. Once you get a letter from a gentleman, you're engaged. Did you have a question, ma'am? Yes.
How was Christmas so much different in 1881 compared to 80 after?
Oh, now you're asking me to have the gift of second sight, are you not? To look ahead to 1881. Fortunately, we can do that tonight. And Mr. Garfield had some relatives in the family that were known to have that gift, by the way. His mother's side of the family was known to do astrology and seances and things. But if we look ahead 1 year to 1881, it would be a completely different scenario for the Garfield family. James Garfield shot July 2nd, 1881, died September 19th. So Christmas, again, that year would be a somber one. It would be held in Cleveland. Lucretia and the children took up residence out there for the winter and would be back here in the summer and spring. And so Christmas would be held out on Prospect, close to 40th Street. Lucretia had a home there. But there would be that empty chair, you know, the family member who was missing at the hearth side for sure. And it would be a simple occasion without the head of the family there. Yes, sir.
In 1880, is there, for travel, was there train nearby, or, and then to go into Cleveland, how long would it have taken typically?
Yes, fortunately, the train was not too far away. The depot where Deeker's Side Tracks is today, that restaurant, that was the Menor Train Depot. So the train tracks for the Michigan Southern Railroad just went right through the farm property here. But the depot not far away, probably a mile or less. And so you hop aboard and you could take a train into Cleveland. You can head the other direction and pick up another train once you get to the Pittsburgh area and head further south to Washington, D.C. So this was a very convenient spot for the Garfields to live because it was easily accessed by train, the main road to Cleveland and Buffalo right out front in Menor Avenue. But train travel made our lives so much better. You can imagine going to Cleveland an hour or so, depending on the number of stops. And Willoughby was the other place to shop. That was the bigger city than Mentor. Painesville is the shopping for things for the farm, like seeds and plants and trees and things like that. Yes, ma'am?
What did you farm and what animals did you have on the property and who were your neighbors?
What did we farm? What animals did we have on our property and who were our neighbors? Well, there is a wonderful census that was taken in 1880 that hangs at the back of the house, and our volunteers can point it out to you. And you look across line 1, and it'll have an enumeration of all the plants and animals and things that were here, including pigs, 2 types of cows, beef and dairy. There were chickens, where you parked tonight was the chicken yard. There were turkeys, obviously. Then there were things planted for the animals to eat as well as for us. Vegetable garden, there was a peach and apple orchard. And that census is wonderfully done where you can just see how much of everything was raised here. And of course, no refrigeration, so we have to use it up or keep it in cold storage. We had an ice house that helped preserve things for a while, through the winter especially. And who were our neighbors? We had wonderful neighbors. Mrs. Alvord to the west has a piece of property there that my husband was coveting as a possible place for us to build a bigger house. The house that was here was very small when we moved in. Hard to imagine now. And then to the east was Mr. Aldrich. Almost forgot his name. E.T.C. Aldrich. And he was quite wonderful during that front porch campaign that my husband ran here, because he was going back and forth to that train station, bringing people here if necessary, housing some people that wanted to stay overnight, sort of the man of all trades to help us out during that time, talking to reporters, maybe even putting up the 2 older boys of our household so they had a place to sleep and we could give up their bedroom. But Mr. Aldrich was a wonderful neighbor. Those were the 2 immediate neighbors.
We can take one more question from the audience, and then we'll have some time where you can mingle and you can talk one-on-one with her
That
while
would be
some
great.
people start at the house.
Right, yes, sir, you've been waiting for one more.
So how did he end up deciding to move here instead of like Cleveland or somewhere with all the political aspirations?
Good question. How did James Garfield decide to move to the 19th District of Ohio? And at one point, Portage County was lopped off. We lived in Hiram. And so once Portage County is lopped off and Lake County is added to the 19th District, we had to find another home in our district out of the counties that were part of it. You want to live near your constituents, right? And so our good friend, Dr. Robeson, who lived just a mile or so west up the road where Toys R Us is today, said that he knew of a farm here that was owned by the widow Dickey. She was looking to sell it to somebody, and my husband should come take a look. And so in October of 1876, he came and surveyed the property. He knew that it was quite pricey for really what was here, but he thought it might be a good investment and it might prove to be the perfect place to raise 4 boys and teach them a good hard day's work. So he made the deal with Mrs. Dickey in the fall of 1876, and that put him right here on the most Republican end of the 19th District. With the main road out front, with the railroad close by, it was the perfect situation for a politician, as it turns out. Thank you all so much for your wonderful questions. I will be out and about where the refreshments are if you have any